Well, good evening. Welcome back to the Lord's house this evening. As the throngs are streaming in, please turn to the back of your hymnal to page 820. Page 820. We're going to read Psalm 97 tonight, Psalm 97, as we work our way through the Psalter. Come on in, everyone. Page 820, in the back of your Trinity hymnal, Psalm 97. The Lord reigns, let the earth be glad. Let the distant shores rejoice. Clouds and thick darkness surround him. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne. Fire goes before him and consumes his foes on all sides. His lightning lights up the world. The earth sees and trembles. The mountains melt like wax before the Lord of all the earth. The heavens proclaim his righteousness, and all the people see his glory. All who worship images are put to shame. Those who boast in idols, worship him, all you gods. Zion hears and rejoices, and the villages of Judah are glad because of your judgments, O Lord. For you, O Lord, are the most high over all the earth. You are exalted far above all gods. Let those who love the Lord hate evil, for he guards the lives of his faithful ones and delivers them from the hand of the wicked. Light is shed upon the righteous, and joy upon the upright heart. Rejoice in the Lord, you who are rich, and praise his holy name. If you turn to hymn number 63 in your hymnal, Jehovah reigns, let the earth be glad. It's a versification of this psalm. The tune is kind of unfamiliar, so we're going to use a different tune for our musicians. That's page 19. Jehovah reigns, let the earth be glad. 6 verses.
Good evening, everybody. Trust you've had a marvelous and restful Lord's Day. Let's open with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we come before you in the evening hours of this day. Lord, we are so thankful for one day in 7, one day that reminds us that we are beholden to you, that even our calendar belongs to you. One day in 7 that provides us a rest which our minds and our bodies so desperately need, that our spirits need as well. We thank you, Lord, for feeding us in your house today. We pray, Lord, that we would glean more knowledge and information that we can grow from. We can understand your wonderful works in this world better. These things we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Talking about providential parallels this morning. I didn't know that this is the song that was chosen for this evening, but it's great. Second verse, consuming fire destroys his foes, around the world his lightnings blaze. The third verse, the heavens his righteousness proclaim, through earth his glory shines abroad. From idol worship turn with shame and bow before the living God. So what we're going to talk about today is the barbarians of Northern Europe. And fits well with what the song was right there. What do you know about those barbarian tribes of Northern Europe? So we're still talking about the very, very early Middle Ages at the latest, the end of Imperial Rome, which kind of really ended in kind of 496. That would be like the official, I would say, end of Western Rome, really. But what do you know about the barbarians of that time? What countries would these barbarians be from nowadays? Yeah, mostly Germanic barbarians we're talking about. And it's the Germanic barbarians, they themselves would have come originally probably from a Scandinavian sort of a way. But yeah, who swept across Europe. Vandals going, across to Gaul and Spain and North Africa. And we talked about them last time, coming back up into Italy. And we talked about, the Visigoths, who were pushed out until the Hun conquered the Ostrogoths, and so the Visigoths were, worried. We'll talk about them a little bit today. You had Celts up in kind of a dark-haired, darker-skinned people up in the British Isles who worshipped Druids. Had Druids. They worshipped, in groves instead of the big temples. You had the wild Picti and the Scotti up in Ireland and Scotland, and so you had just a very barbarous people. And that word barbarian, do you know where that word barbarian comes from even? Barbar. That's exactly right. Yeah, so the Romans making fun of these people who don't speak Latin and they don't speak Greek. And all they do is just go bar, 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 bar. You're a barbarian, right? You just, you blather along. Yeah, and so what do we know about the Germanic peoples who eventually came to control Rome, to be the masters of Rome? What do we know? What was the nature of these barbaric people? Lighten the loafers? Yeah, no, not at all. They were a warlike people. If ever there's a warlike people on the face of the earth, this is these guys. And so when Christianity was going to penetrate into those lands, the monks and the missionaries who went up there, one of the things that they often did, there are many stories of it, demonstrating the power of Christianity. These were, again, powerful, violent people. In some regards, they did not have the vices of the Romans, so they respected women. They would have looked at homosexuality and been like, whoa, no way. Heavy, heavy drinkers, heavy gamblers, who basically lived for fighting. And so there's a lot of stories, like who knows the story of Boniface, for example? Boniface, the missionary Boniface, and the Germans in the grove of Thor.
Oh yeah, he cut down the tree.
Yeah, yep. The way the story goes is there was a sacred tree, and he said no, and they're like, oh, the gods are going to strike you with lightning, right? We have power gods. Your God is not powerful enough to, the God of, Thor, the God of thunder will destroy you if you do this. And the way the story goes, Boniface said, oh yeah, watch me. He took his axe and went whonk and stuck it into the tree. The way the story goes is a miraculous mighty wind came roaring through the forest right then and broke the tree with one shot from him. So whether it was, one shot and the wind knocked it down, or whether that was a embellishment and he just chopped it down, basically nothing happened to him. And this is the sort of thing that really impressed the German war sort of people, thinking then of Jesus as a warlord, right? Loving St. Peter, right? You can figure out why would they love St. Peter? They thought his great act was, they loved the story of him hacking off the servant's ear, drawing his sword and hacking off the servant's ear when his warlord was attacked. Stuff like that they loved. In fact, Boniface, when he hacked down that oak, he built a chapel from that oak to St. Peter, right? Yeah, so those are the people that we're talking about. Over in Druid worship, these are very savage worship styles, like building wicker men and putting prisoners in them, hundreds at a time, lighting them on fire to their gods, worshiping the horn god, Cernunnos, and just, if you've read books like Rosemary Sutcliffe's Eagle of the Ninth, and you just kind of see what is the name of the hero in that, you guys? Who remember? It's Marcus. Marcus, yeah, anyway. As he's going in there and he's like looking at the dark pagan worship. Very, very dark pagan lands. And so that's what we're talking about now, today at least. How in the world did a people like this submit themselves to Christianity? And it went in kind of different ways. So like I said, you can look at kind of 476 as the end of the Roman Empire. And it was kind of a whimpery sort of an end. Put that as the date as the end of the Roman Empire, because that's when the German soldiers really became the rulers of Rome. So 475, a guy named Orestes, who was a barbarian commander of the imperial troops, he forced the Senate to crown his son, Romulus Augustulus, little Augustus, as the emperor. As happened often in those days, another general, a German commander, Otto Vakar, killed him and decided, no, we're done with this imperial line stuff. He proclaimed himself the head of the government, and really nobody was surprised, because this is 100 years after things like we talked about last time, Alaric and Gaiseric and Attila the Hun and these barbarians who had come to Rome. Rome had been sacked a couple of times, but 476, you can say, no, the new masters of Europe were the Germans, the German warriors. And again, the tribes, the barbarian tribes that we're talking about, not just only the German ones, but Vandals, Franks, Angles, Saxons, Goths, Lombards, Burgundians. Didn't we have some more joke ones that we made up in history last year? The North Dakotans, right. Yeah, and so when they had started to come into Rome, how did these guys kind of first contact in Rome? Well, originally they were a people that were kind of at a cultural stage halfway between pastoral and being agricultural. They didn't have a lot of trade. They just bartered commerce with cattle. We know stuff about them from the Roman historian Tacitus, who, like I said, points out that they were drunkards and they were high-level gamblers, but they were courageous, super courageous. Lots of respect for women, didn't have a lot of the Roman vices. Their favorite form of entertainment, when things were really depraved in Rome, their favorite form of entertainment would be like a bard coming around a fire and just recounting the tales of the heroes and the gods as they drank their beer and such, right? They lived to fight. Well, they lived to fight, and they really lived for their warlord, right? So, the warlord fought for victory, he fought for the gods, but whoever their chief was, they lived to fight for him. In fact, if you were a pagan German, and if your battle chief was killed on the field, you were not to leave that field. Like, you were just keep fighting until you're all dead. But if you left the field after your chief was killed, then you were despised for the rest of your life. Everything was about your battle chief. And so they started to come into the Roman Empire in force, like I say, when the Huns appeared on their border, and the Huns wiped out the Ostrogoths, and then the Visigoths, who were the West Goths, Rome was still had some might, and so they just petitioned the emperor. They said, wouldn't you rather have us inside your borders? Like, we'll bolster your defenses, but we'd rather be kind of the shield wall of the legions as well, if that's okay. And Rome, which was, weakening at that time, was like, yeah, sure, come on in. That's a good idea. And so they came in. Things could have been good in that sort of circumstance, except what happened is there were corrupt Roman officials who started to abuse the Visigoths, and the Visigoths were, like I say, really proud and really warlike, and they couldn't take those sort of offenses towards their chiefs, and so they went on a rampage, and the emperor's name was Valens. He tried to stop them, but they defeated him, actually killed him in the Battle of Adrianople, and historians do kind of pick that battle as one of those decisive battles of history, because it really kind of pointed out that, you know what, the Roman legions are not invincible anymore. These barbarians who were within their borders kind of whipped them right there. And so that kind of just opened the floodgate for barbarians, and they realized, oh, Rome's not invincible. We're all just going to cross your borders, push the boundaries. And so, yeah, I think we mentioned last week or 2 weeks ago the one leader, Alaric, who was threatening Italy. So Rome's borders began to shrink. They began to recall their legions to deal with these sort of invasions, pulled out from Britain. There are some people that, there's some really great, we were talking about this last week, Arthurian legends. Where do those come from? I kind of like the theory that Arthur was actually a Briton who loved the light of Rome, and when Rome withdrew, he kind of gathered together and kind of fought and tried to hold the ground. Who knows? Mythology about Arthur, is it not? I don't know, but that gives you the idea of what it's like. Roman legions were withdrawing, and Romans had been in places like Britain up in the frontier since 50 BC. And there had been a great increase in the quality of life because of that. People had bathhouses, and there was technology, and so the world really did seem like it was just going crazy again. Legions were leaving, barbarians were moving in, and you had all of these different tribes that settled in different places. The Franks in Gaul, Angles and Saxons who were in Germany eventually went to England. That's why we call it Angleland, because the Angles were the ones who went there. But really, was it as cataclysmic as they all thought? Well, the answer really is no, it wasn't. In fact, it was, as you look at this, what happened with Christianity, it was definitely in God's plan. Everything's in his plan. But it was a good part of his plan that the German tribes began to take control and corrupt Rome began to fall. And it really wasn't that cataclysmic for Europe, because when the German tribes came in, they took the emperor's land, they took a lot of empty land, but they didn't really displace a lot of landholders. And they, over the next couple hundred years, they assimilated language and they assimilated culture and speech. And as we'll see, Christianity kind of conquered them as well. But what the church really faced was just an enormous task of Christianizing the northern peoples, right? And it wouldn't be very hard to make them nominally Christian, right? Why do you think these northern tribes would be interested in at least nominally calling themselves Christians and being Christians? What would you think? Why would they be like, Christianity sounds kind of good?
Everybody loves the pardon from sin part.
That wasn't so much what motivated them, but on a more practical level, if you're a poor, barbaric people on the outside and you're looking in at the empire, and the empire has incredible amounts of gold, and you're a people who thinks, well, it's all about the mighty gods clashing with each other. You think, man, how do those people own the entire world and they're so wealthy? Maybe it has something to do with they're gods. Like Christianity are the gods of the empire. So they were willing to be Christians in a nominal sense. But how are you going to actually bring real Christianity to this kind of a people, right? People who really are barbarians. It's not just that they know nothing of, culture and classical literature and reading and architecture, and they're just savages, filthy savages living out in the woods, right? And most importantly, how do you get hard drinking, hard fighting, hard gambling, glorifying of death warriors like this? How do you get them to act like Christians, right? How do you convince them that no, love is the way, right? Big task. And so they came into Christianity in two kinds of ways. Some of them came directly from their paganism, and we'll see the route that they took. Others came through Arianism, right? Which is surprising, but a lot of the German tribes converted to Arianism. And it wasn't so much because of the theology of Arianism that they converted, but it's because the way that Arian church structure was, right? Arians were cast out of Rome, so they didn't really have an ecclesiastical center. They were very, there wasn't like a center of power. Like there was this Arian group and this Arian group, and your tribe could be Arian, and you didn't really have to answer towards some pope in Rome sort of thing, if that makes sense. And then they liked the idea of Christ being the firstborn creature. Like I said, if he's the great warlord, they were okay with that, but they really weren't interested in the minutiae of theology. They liked the idea of Christianity as a religion because it looks like it built this empire. They liked the idea of this mighty first creation of God being the great warlord, Jesus as he was, and they liked the idea that they didn't have to have this centralized authority. They were decentralized. They didn't like centralized authority. And part of the reason why they became Arians is because there was a missionary named Ulfilas, and he devoted his life to them. He traveled up there. He labored for 40 years. A lot of other missionaries joined them, but he was an Arian, so he preached what he had been taught. And in terms of the Goths, at least, it wasn't just a social pressure thing. They really converted from paganism. They really believed what Ulfilas taught them. He translated the Bible into their language, which is a pretty amazing thing in mid-4th century, although he left out the Book of Kings because he thought that's way too warlike for them. I'm not going to let them read this stuff because then they'll really start killing each other. But yeah, so that Arianism had its entry to the Goths, and then it began to spread to other tribes. We kind of already talked about that a little bit. So that's kind of on the German side. Who could maybe give an idea, or do you know where maybe Christianity on the England, Ireland side came from? Anybody know a story about a certain guy? St. Patrick, who I think technically is actually not a canonized saint. We call him St. Patrick, but I don't think he's actually a canonized saint. I could be wrong about that. I have to ask some of my Catholic friends. But yeah, he wasn't Irish. That's the interesting thing, right? He was a Briton. Yes, he was a Briton, but he was captured by Irish warriors. His family were Christians. His father was a deacon, actually, but he was kind of a nominal Christian. He was made a slave. He was made a swineherd, right? So that was his job for the Irish. He took care of their pigs, not treated very well. In fact, treated horribly. But he began to pray to God on a hillside there. I forget the name of the hillside, but he began to pray to God regularly, could I please have freedom? And he recounts that that's where his conversion came from. He wrote, the Lord opened to me the sense of my unbelief, right? As he was on that hillside, just all alone, thinking, I'm just feeding pigs. Kind of like the prodigal son. So he was there for 6 years. He escaped. There's stories about his escape, making his way back to his home. Who knows how much of those are true? But he did get home, and he intended to stay at home, but then he had a dream. And in that dream, there were babies of Ireland pleading with him to come back and tell him about Christ. And I don't know, if babies are pleading with you, you listen. So he decided to return. He needed to learn more about Christianity first, so he studied for a good while, and then he went back. And the stories of his success in Ireland are just the stuff of legend, but true. Just so many thousands and thousands and thousands of converts. And a lot of monastic communities were set up over there as well. And so Ireland, super great Christian success story, so great that Ireland began to send missionaries back to Britain. And once it had done a lot of Christianizing in Britain and had, missions set up in Scotland and such, they began to send missionaries back to the continent. And so Ireland really was this major missions force for the Christianizing even of the continent of Europe. Let's see, I already talked about that a little bit. You don't really probably care about what the names of those monasteries and such were. So then, we talked about the Germans. We talked about kind of the Irish and the British, how God was working there. The Franks, maybe some of the history students from last year remember what the Frankish king, what his name was? Remember? So-and-so the first? Clovis? Yeah, remember Clovis the first? 481. He would probably be one of the very first most important barbarian kings to convert to Christianity. He had married a woman who was a Christian. He was not a Christian. Her name was Clotilda. And she spoke to her husband all the time. She said, there is one true God. You should worship him. And Clovis was a barbarian. He said, you're crazy. This is nothing. They had a child. When it came time for his child to be baptized, Clotilda wanted the child baptized. He said, yeah, fine, whatever. It's nonsense. The child quickly died after his baptism. In fact, he was wearing his baptismal robes when he died. So Clovis really thought this was horrible. He blamed the baptism. He hated God for it. Clotilda, though, was saying to him, listen, honey, God took this baby straight to heaven. It's actually a beautiful thing that happened. But he was like, ugh. So they had another son. He was also baptized. He got sick right after that. And Clovis was like, see, I told you, baptism, this is the curse of the gods upon our babies. We should not have our babies baptized. But then he went to war, and he, his baby did recover. So they his wife prayed for the baby, did recover. He went into war. He was fighting the Almani tribe. He was losing, and he cried out, Jesus Christ, Clotilda says you are the Son of the living God, and you can give victory to those who hope in you. Give me victory. I'll be baptized. I've tried my God. They've deserted me. I call on you. Only save me. Right? So he looked like he was kind of a Constantine sort of situation where it looked like he was going to be routed, fell on his knees, prayed to Jesus, and the battle turned decisively. The king of the Almani was killed. His army fled. Clovis went back and told his wife, hey, yeah, Jack. Yeah, this is all the Catholic faith. Yeah, and this is not quite yet. People aren't really fervently, declaredly looking at the Pope as the leader, but they kind of are out of habit and principle a little bit. Yeah, yep. So it's Roman Catholicism at this time. And so Clotilda was super excited. Oh, my husband wants to be baptized. She called the bishop over. And Clovis said, I want to be baptized. He said, but my people are not going to take this. But I'll talk to him. And so he said to his people, I'm going to be baptized. I think we should renounce the German gods. And lo and behold, everyone's surprised. 3,000 of his men said, yes, we agree. And they all were baptized at the same time. And so a big mass baptism, which kind of raises a question then. What do you think about that concept? What do you think about, because in different mission groups have different thrusts in history. Some of them, Protestants tend to go towards an individual and talk about an individual conversion, and then they What's difficult about that, though? Let's say you guys are all pagan barbarians, you worship Thor, and I talk to Brant and he becomes a Christian. What's difficult about Brant being a Christian? Jack?
We can't just go into the whole world and say everybody's a Christian and Catholic.
Well, but you could begin that one at a time. But what's hard about? He's all alone. Right. He's got to be plucked out of his culture. Right. He doesn't. He's away from his people group, his language group. It's a big deal. It'd be like, someone coming out of Mormonism, right? So it's difficult, but at least you're dealing with a real convert, because if he's going to do that, it's really deep. What's the difficulty of, like happened with Clovis and his 3,000 warriors, this sort of mass conversions, which is the method that converted Europe more than the individual thing? What's the problem with a mass conversion?
Hard to know hard to know if it's authentic or it's just following the crowd.
Right. And there's something that's easy about that, right? You're not ripping them out of their culture. They're not leaving their family. Their whole family went along with it, right? So it's not like you're going to die necessarily. So there's a benefit to that. But yeah, the difficulty is it a true conversion? How much of your old pagan thought did you just pull along with you? The missionaries are among you and they're going to teach you, well, we're Christians now, we don't do it that way, but how quick is that going to happen, right? Yeah, it's interesting. What do you think? Is there benefit in either way? Warriors all going with their king? Jerry?
I think, with Constantine, when he, turned the empire right, the world came in with it. So that was kind of a negative force in the church. It was a good thing, of course, right, people being converted, but so many at once coming in.
Yeah. I mean, there's even churches that experience super rapid growth at a time. They even experience something like that. I'm so thankful that the Lord has kept growing CPC, but He's not like sent us 600 people at once. It's like 2 here, 3 there, 4 there. Glenn?
I think as a benefit to a national conversion of that degree is that it allows a much greater or quicker degree of cultural change. I mean, whether someone fully agrees with the Christian ideals, a lot of times they do see some benefits in it, and they agree with those new lifestyles.
Right? Yeah, and that is definitely a benefit. And added to that, suddenly it's legal for the Christian missionaries to go everywhere, right? If you're doing one at a time and the warlord doesn't like that, it kills you quick, and it's hard to do that sort of frontline mission work, as people like Peter Hammond and his group find all through Africa, right? Islamic people are gunning for your life. But yeah, there is something where it's like just open. So it's difficult because paganism can come in with it. One of the things that paganism can come in with, for example, is if they're being taught teachings about saints and you're somebody who's used to worshiping a whole bunch of gods, it's kind of easy for you to start venerating this or that saint, right? And that is kind of what happened, right? You had a place where, for some of these Germanic tribes, they were venerating the saints more almost than they were of Jesus. If you're a pig farmer, well, St. Anthony's your guy, right? If you farm hens, St. Gall, right? So if you're a whatever, if you got a sore throat, St. Genevieve, right? Whatever. And so that can happen because you're used to worshiping a whole bunch of gods. You start praying to a saint, fix my sore throat, take care of my pig herd, right? And you forget to talk straight to Jesus. There's some great stories about that, but we can chat about that later. Yeah, so that's kind of the beginning of how their conversion. One benefit, of course, of the Franks being converted is, Clovis was in the region of Gaul, which is France, and the connection to the British Isle right there. So, missionaries could travel much more easily from the south into England, as they were also coming from Ireland in the north. probably one of the most famous missionaries who came from the south was another St. Augustine of Canterbury. And he was in Rome with the Pope, Gregory the Great, and they were at a slave market. And you have all these dark, swarthy slaves from the lower southern regions of the world. And then there were some Angles who were there in the slave market, who had been bought from up north and were being sold again. And they were blonde, and they were, fair-skinned and big and, strong. And the Pope asked, "Who are these people that they're selling?" And Saint Augustine said, "Oh, those are Angles." He said, "Angles? No, they're angels." Right? And he's like, "You've got to go up there and minister to these people." So he commissioned St. Augustine to head up there. And so he was one of the more famous ones. He became the first Archbishop of Canterbury, would be this guy, St. Augustine. And that was around 600. He went up there and again got up into Britain. There was another case where King Ethelbert, who was a pagan, was married to a Christian queen, Queen Bertha. And there's some really great stories. Again, you don't know when you look at these stories how much of them are, fanciful and they're hyperbole and they're expanded upon. But I'm one of those who doesn't think you necessarily have to dismiss the miraculous things that happen. I don't think you should, actually, because I think in frontline mission works, God does do a lot of miraculous things. So, I'm not going to stand here and say this and that instance is true, but if you're interested in some interesting reading, go Google the things around St. Augustine of Canterbury and King Ethelbert and such. There was a lot of showdowns between Druids and people like Augustine, and pretty cool stuff happened, supposedly. So, yeah, go take a look at that. So there were other missionaries who followed him, kind of getting up later, 7th century. A lot of, there began to be a little bit of a problem as these very independent-minded British and Irish monks were coming down from the south. And you had Arians over in the eastern part who were also very independent, and the region is the clan. And then you have official emissaries of the Pope coming up into both lands, and they're trying to expand the Pope's authority. There was one story of, one king where there was a clash between British monks who were calling on the authority of, whatever his name, Columbanus or whatever, and they were clashing with the monks from the south, and they were like, "Well, we have the authority of the Pope behind us." And the king turned and asked the Irish monks, the British monks, he's like, "Well, are they right? Is Peter really the vicar of Christ?" And the Irish monks were like, "Well, yes, he is." And the king was like, "Well, I have to go with the guy who guards the gateway of heaven." And so then the southern ones began to win. So that just gives you an idea of the sort of conflict that would be faced even within the church, but it also gives you an idea of how the church could spread. It could spread quickly because you had mass Christianizations that were happening. It could spread quickly because, as funny as it sounds, Arianism was an opening for Christianity, and then the barbarians sort of dug that. Jesus as a war leader, as this mighty first created being. And then it took later Christians to come among them and say, "No, Arianism's not right. That's not who Jesus actually is." But it was like a stepping stone towards understanding Jesus more. And then miraculous things like St. Patrick, who's just a humdinger of a guy. I mean, one of the greatest Christians of the last 2,000 years, right? Just unbelievable how many tens of thousands were converted by his work. So you had lots of orthodoxy flowing around, and you had lots of unorthodoxy flowing around, and you had, like I say, mass conversions. But it's interesting that as these Germans were owning the empire from within, God was conquering them from within. Yeah. And that's brings us up to people like Boniface, who chops down the oak. And yeah. All right. That's all I have for today. Any questions on any of that? I love this period, this part of the world. I love this period of history we're getting into. Any questions? Is this period interesting to y'all at all? I love the Middle Ages. That's what we're going to get into from now on. We'll be looking at from 600 till Martin Luther in 1517. It's the next section, the Christian Middle Ages. Yeah.
During this time, was there any real truth
Yeah, no, there was a lot of truth that was going out. So, people like St. Augustine, who became, the first Archbishop of Canterbury, yeah, he carried with him Orthodox truth. St. Patrick carried with him Orthodox truth, for sure. Ulfilas did not carry Orthodoxy with him, but he was a really early sort of a missionary, and it at least pacified large warlike people groups, made them ready for the gospel, even though they weren't getting the actual gospel. Or at least they're missing a very fundamental point of it. But they were turning from their gods. They were burning their gods and accepting, Jehovah. Yeah. So yes, there was, like all mission fields, there's a lot of good stuff going on, a lot of bad stuff going on. Yep. Yep. Yeah. 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 That's a really good way to put it. A really, really rough version of Christianity. They hear Peter's hacking off the ear, and they miss the subtleties of, like, Peter's not exercising faith. They're like, yeah, hack off both ears. So it's like, it's a rough version, but they're, kind of getting the story, sort of. At least starting to learn the alphabet of Christianity, the language of Christianity.
Well, it seems like a parallel to the modern day charismatic movement in third world countries.
Yeah. That's a really great point. That's what a lot of Christianity in Africa is, right? People who barely know Christianity, but they have it a little bit, but they have a fire, so they go out and they do missions work. And Africa desperately needs really highly trained Orthodox Christian pastors to go and gather groups of those pastors together and get them taught and, teach them theology. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny that eventually, Martin Luther is going to come out of that area, more of that area than the other areas. And yeah, it's interesting to look back and just see how God's working and what he does, and things that look like horrendous tragedies, the barbarians are sacking Europe, turn out to be, turning out to be, I thought that maybe that was a question. It turns out to be actually God's hand working. Like Rome needed to be sacked. It really did. The church could rise out of the ashes, yeah.
What's actually happening to the hierarchy of the Roman Christian and Roman Catholic Church at this point?
At this time? Yeah, so it would be 600 AD, 590 I think is when Gregory the Great was born, Pope Gregory the Great. And so at his time is when it was really being solidified that the Papa of Rome is officially, he's the head of everybody, right? But that was gradually happening, like we mentioned last time, when Leo stands at the gates of Rome and the emperor can do nothing, or later on when the Vandals come and the emperor flees, he can do nothing, and it's the Pope who walks out to the barbarian kings and says, "Don't sack Rome," right? And in one case they say, "Okay, just walk away," and the other case they say, "Well, we'll just do 15 days of sacking, but we're not going to kill people," and so everybody of the world says, "Man, the emperor can't do squat anymore," but the Bishop of Rome, man, he's so brave, and he will actually save us. So great respect for those, 200 years was growing for the Bishop of Rome. And as we've seen before, he was taking Orthodox positions in great church councils and standing against Arians and supporting the good people. And so, yeah, the papacy was growing in power because there were a lot of really brave popes who also were Orthodox. And so, it's authority flows to people who are like that. And, not totally right by any means, but Gregory the Great was kind of well named. We'll talk about him some more as we're going into the Middle Ages. Just super powerful, influential individual. So yes, authority of Rome was definitely being solidified. As an example, I think his name was King Oswey or something like that up in England, who had this decision between the Irish monks and the Roman monks. And when they both agreed, well, Peter was the one commissioned, he went with the Roman delegation. So yeah, Rome's power was definitely solidifying in Europe.
Pastor Moses,
Yeah.
do you have any recommendations on how we ought to read these historical stories? When we think of a history story, we want to know individual facts and hard data versus, did Boniface chop down that tree with 500 stripes, or was it
Right.
the wind, maybe the Spirit of God, kind of more of an allegory? Or when we look at paintings of the era, when we're describing the crucifixion of Jesus, they're not paintings of Hebrews, they're paintings of castles and medieval folk
Right.
crucifying Jesus.
Right.
So it's not quite the same way that we think of the historical data, basically.
Yeah, that's a super great question. There's a couple different questions together, but I would say what I always want to be careful with myself, and I would urge anybody of a modern man or woman to be careful of, is not to look at ancient and fantastic stories with Enlightenment eyes, where we think like, well, that's silly. These old people, they don't know what they're talking about. These people were brilliant, right? And if you've got, fairly contemporary witnesses saying that such and such happened, I just want to be careful that I, as a modern person, just says, well, that can't be. That has to be an embellished story. Why can't it be? Like, why couldn't Boniface swing an axe and then a targeted wind from God? He did stuff like that a lot in the Bible, and we're fine with it there. Why couldn't it have just ripped this thing over? But even if it didn't, I step back and I would say, boy, the bravery of a Boniface, that he would walk into Thor's sacred grove, walk up to Thor's sacred tree, surrounded by bloodthirsty, vicious, warlike people who worship the god, and say, you want to see? Let's see if Thor strikes me dead. Takes his double-bladed axe and goes, rolls up his shirt sleeve, takes off his monk's habit and goes, whack, 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 and it falls down. And he's like, see? That's awesome, right? So that's almost as much of a miracle in my mind as the other is. So, yeah. You asked something else there. The paintings.
Yeah, so for example, when we look at crucifixion paintings from that era, a lot of times it's not
Right.
really, what you picture a Hebrew, but
Yeah.
it's their era.
Yeah, even later on, you'll look at, Flemish painters, and they're painting that, and they're in Flemish garb or whatever. A lot of times those artists intentionally did that because they were just trying to bridge the gap and just, just put themselves and their culture into this, and so you could, understand it better. Pastors will do that all the time from the pulpit. You'll say, oh, it's like, and you give an analogy from the modern world, and you're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. I can understand that. So artists did that frequently. I wouldn't necessarily fault them for that or say, oh, it isn't true. They were making an artistic choice right there. Yeah, it's, again, you can't take a time machine back and see if Boniface really hacked that thing down. You can't see what things actually looked like, but yeah. In general, you just want to read history always as his story, and you got to zoom in and look at the details and then say, well, I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm going to zoom out and look at the macro. And the macro is, wow, God was really working in Northern Europe. He was even using Arian missionaries. And had he not, had Ulfilas, who was really brave as well and devoted, and, insofar as he believed, he really, loved Jesus. He gave himself to try to help a people and bring light to them. God even used the Arians to break down barriers. And in his plan, he was going to send later on the Martin Luthers, much later on, 1,000 years later on.
I guess another aspect too about stories from history is
correct. Right. Right. That's the details the people believed. Yep. And God even works in those details. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely one who doesn't automatically discount miraculous stories from these periods. And I'm not embarrassed by them, let's put it that way. Like when secular guys are, do you really believe? And I'm like, do you really think the world came from nothing? Right? Right? Do you really believe that? Yours is way more ridiculous than that a wind knocked down Boniface's tree, you silly man. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Any more thoughts or questions? Yeah, the next period is super cool. I love medieval stuff. JJ, is your question that you want to sing? I knew it. JJ is like my alarm clock. Yes, JJ, we can sing. Who's leading the singing today? I think JJ, I'm thinking Grandpa's gonna lead the singing.
Start off with number 444, in hymnal 444. One of the songs from the mission section of the hymn book. O Zion, haste your mission high fulfilling, to tell to all the world that God is light. That he who made all nations is not willing one soul should perish, lost in shades of night. 444. still filled with barbarians who need to hear the gospel. And so this message that was being carried through the barbaric world in those ancient times still needs to be done. Jack?
676, 676,
676?
yes.
Day by day. Did I understand that JJ had a number?
He
Okay, did
has his hand up here. He's
Oh.
back here.
Oh, there it is, way back there, okay. Okay, do you know what you wanted to sing?
I think he's still deciding.
Okay, well, let's go over here to Brittany.
116.
116?
Yes.
Or the beauty of the earth. 6:16,
6:18.
6:18. His eyes on the sparrow. Okay, JJ, got the hymn.
693.
693. Blessed assurance. Nathaniel Crosby's great, great
sorry, 640.
646,
640.
640. One of the songs that came out of the Jesus movement in the 1970s, Andrea Couch, 1971, my tribute. Yes, Mr. Corbin there in the balcony.
263.
263. Thanks for shouting that out. I could ask a few of that. 263. Lift high the cross. too. because
I should have just said it first.
And I know, great song of surrender. The other, Ethan, did you have one?
117.
117. The spacious firmament on high. Wow, we saw some spectacular things happening in the spacious firmament on high last night. Yes, Tom?
296. 296.
296. This will be our last one for this evening.